Frankie here. Today I am joined by Tafiya. We're here in Toronto. We're going to talk about experiences and knowledge on breaking. Tafiya, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to see you once again.
Good to see you.
I've been to Toronto at least half a dozen times this year alone, but just talking with you offline, I don't even know when you're in the country, right? How are things been going with training? You're in Toronto for a little bit. What has life been this last year for you?
More so the past year, I've been more in and out in general. Like I'm in Niagara region, so I'm in isolation over there when I'm there. A lot of trips going out to the States, or we were in Europe this year for like a month. I was in West Africa last year for 2 months in Ghana, and then came back, went to Vancouver, did some things, came back to isolate. Been in Montreal a lot because my girlfriend lives over there. I practice very meticulously in Niagara, just consistently doing things with myself, my own inner coach, just like try this, what if this, try it again. A lot of experimentation. Creating is quite easy, so the thing at this point, I'm 32, it's about form, it's about structure.
You're traveling, is this just for events or are you doing other career pursuits?
It's mixed in. So for example, going to West Africa, I am a Ghanaian citizen as well, like I have dual. So when I go over there, this year I got a grant, and I would say it's also career because working over there with a friend of mine, his name is Nana, started an organization called Afro Break. So we're bringing up like the West African breaking community. How can we elevate Ghana as a country? How can we bring in Nigeria? So it's starting to generate some traction. So going over there this year, I was training. I was just training the community with them, and then also exchanging. They were teaching me kind of African traditional and new school African traditional, which they're fusing in with breaking, and we're thinking about what does breaking mean in the context of that environment? Because you know it's different in every city you go to, and what about you switch countries? Like, what does it mean in Africa? Like, what's the rhythm like there with the music they're listening to? What do they admire? What are they emulating? What do they not know? So filling in the gaps, like providing fundamentals. Like I did intensive workshops over there. So like, imagine they were training, some of them for 2 weeks, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. with one person, and then I facilitated the next week 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. In between that, we went to Nigeria on the weekend, ran our qualifier event. My work and my life, like I don't take vacations, it's all one. You know? So it's all part of the journey.
When you started breaking, did you know you would be in the space that you are to do just some of what you're describing, just this incredible kind of work?
No, like I honestly thought that I would be done by now. I always dance for myself in general, and it just keeps going and going. So you do what you can when you have the resources, when you have the capacity. Sometimes you gotta handle your business, you gotta find those career opportunities to elevate your skills and do other things. But this year seemed like a very travel-oriented dance year.
I know you just recently had a talk with the Just Breakin guys. Shout out to Eric, shout out to Dennis and James. I watched the whole thing. As it relates to traveling abroad, one thing that you said, and I like your word choice here, sometimes a person, you kind of need to make the magic happen yourself, right? Instead of just waiting for the opportunity to fall into your lap, whether it's having someone invite you out to a jam to judge or to compete. Hop on a plane, right? You also said one of the realizations you had is that there's just this amazing talent locally that they may never really get the chance to be seen on a large scale. So it makes traveling for you that much more meaningful. It may seem trivial on the surface, but the question I want to ask anyway is, based on your experience, what is the difference between someone who stays in their local scene long term versus someone who actually gets the opportunity, if they have the resources, to travel?
The main thing that I've noticed is that people who never get the opportunity or just choose not to go out for various reasons, they're a bit insecure, and it really shows up when you get a lot of people coming externally inwards, because they're not leaving. So when you get a lot of people coming in, there's a lot of comparison, and comparison is the thief of joy, right? They're always thinking, oh, am I better than this person, or can I beat this person with this move? things like that. And it's kind of weird behavior, and they start almost becoming a little bit like aggressive, or sometimes there's an animosity, like, oh, like, why are you in my city, da 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 da. And they've never left. This weird sense of entitlement, I would say like a sense of ownership that isn't deserved. You claim a city, you claim a space, but you don't represent that space anywhere. You know, like if I said, oh, I rep Toronto, but I never left Toronto to help and support, you know, that kind of reputation of the scene, of the community where I come from, then like what reason would I have to have this ego of, oh, like these people coming in, I gotta show you what's up. Like, no, that's weird. That's very uncomfortable. There's no mental check that occurs, and that is the most important thing, which makes you realize, wow, like I really don't know anything. And when you see other people on the external areas and you come back to your city, sometimes you appreciate what you have and you say, wow, like we're really doing something very different. The other thing we might say is, oh wow, like I learned so much going out there. Hey, did you all know about this? Like, and then you share that information. And then the third thing is, hey, like I met this really cool person out there, and I would love for them to come in, and I would love for you all to come out. You know, and you start bridging those connections. That's how people get opportunities. That's how you grow more. Who knows? Maybe you might like find a new career out in these different places. Like you're literally holding your life down by not doing anything. So we have to move.
It checks you, but you lose a little bit of that insecurity. I think it's because you just realize other people, you're just other people too.
Really? Where did you experience that for yourself?
I stayed in Detroit for a long while. Once I started going to the bigger competitions, but also having the chance to interact with people and seeing that they're human.
That's the key. People glorify others for like how much they win or their status in the breaking community, and then you talk with them, it's like, oh wait, you play Maple Story too? You know, you play Yu-Gi-Oh? It kind of waters everything down.
So at this point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna give you a chance to react to some older footage. This is the first footage I ever saw of you. We're gonna watch the tiebreaker. This is a 3-on-3 in Lansing, Michigan.
Okay. That was the first time I went to Michigan. It's so like brutal for me to watch.
What do you remember about yourself?
2012, even from 2005, I would say there was that resurgence of like everyone's like, whoa, I gotta get my foundation. It's like, you know, like Alien as the Blueprint was hot. Like at the tail end of that, there was like this explosion where all of a sudden it became like, okay, there's the fundamentals and the fundamentalists, and then there's like, okay, but like gotta be so original. So everyone was like really pushing the creative game and trying to just come out with like weird abstract moments, like, and still using fundamentals, but using like, okay, you gotta come up with some really like unique stuff. Every round has to have at least one like hardcore original thing. Either that or you're killing the music in your own way, things like that. So I remember back then, the way I was practicing, I was always trying to like think about like, okay, what's like a signature I can use in a round, or like how do I make like original movement? How do you get to that level where you're just original, you know? And so like as I think back to that kind of battle, that kind of footage, I feel like that event in general was the first time under pressure in a different environment where I felt like, okay, I start to trust myself on how to react to music and how to respond to it in my own unique way. Like I wasn't always using preset movement. Like some of that was me just getting out of a position and being like, oh, the beat is here and I'm here and so are you, and that's what the play is. Originality being the only focus. Like we didn't know about how to create good structure back then. No one was guiding us on structure and form. You know, that's something we figured out later. So we had the ideas and creativity, but not the structure, not the form. Like I look at that and I'm like, oh, like that hurts. When you started breaking, what was being like pinpointed to you? Like what was the Bible? What was the breaking Bible laid out to you?
2011, 2012, now that we're talking about this, I'm trying to answer your question. I want to say multiple things were happening at once. People talked about foundation. People talked about originality too. And we also had YouTube coming up during that time too. So a lot of things just kind of happening at once. There wasn't a very clear direction.
Tricks and combos was hot at the time. Like, you know, fundamentals were hot. Like, abstraction was like at an all-time high, you know, because that's when like Lil Amok and like Rubber Legs were like killing it on like at least the internet. Donkey was really popular at the time. It was like, you know, just like all these different kinds of people who knew how to really put it all together in a good package. And MN Joe, right? Like just destroying it. Because we're like, oh, you're doing everything? You know, like Luigi, you know? And all these people are still dope today, right? So
also at that same time too, we're not quite so deep in the digital age as it relates to breaking anyway. Whereas maybe in present day movements are a little more homogenous, right? We're so globalized technologically, but here I still feel like people still had a sense of crew presence, repping your hometown, repping your style. I think there's a little bit more of that mentality around this time too.
Yeah, regional styles were still prevalent. I still think regional styles are prevalent today. I just think that it's more like percentages of it have been like taken and like dispersed across the globe because like people are relying on the internet for information. So what used to be, you would say 50 or 60% of someone's round, you might attribute to being like from this region. Now you cut that down to like 15 to 20%, so more than half of it is gone and dispersed amongst everybody because now everyone's learned it off of the internet or like a friend of a friend of a friend who has a video, like that kind of thing, or who took the workshop. I think that it's our responsibility to really reflect on our experiences and build new regional styles because that's what evolution is. Unfortunately, though, people aren't always thinking about like what's going to be the next evolution of where I live. Like, you know, I talked about this sometimes with TJ from Supernaturals, and especially last year I was like racking my brain. I was like, what is the next aesthetic or look or perspective of like the quote-unquote Toronto approach? I'm trying not to let it get devoured by the internet. How do I maintain something new and provide like life to it? You know, and I talked to him about his experiences in the past. Like, you know, back then everybody's hoarding movement ideas for themselves, and our crew moves like this and your crew moves like that. There's regional styles, but then there's sub-categories, right? So thinking about that still, I think that comes through lived experience and shared experiences living in one community together. But it requires some building, right? And people have to put effort into it a little bit. It's like a mixture of what's natural and what's intentional.
I remember this story when you went to Japan with your crewmate, competed in the crew battle. I want to get the full story for our viewers in a second here, but first let's watch one of your rounds. What do you think?
A lot better that year. I learned a lot by that point, so it was developing. Also, like, I started to appreciate fundamentals way more at that point, so my structure and my form had gotten a lot better compared to the previous years. So like that 3-year gap between 2012 and 2015 is massive. Like prior to this, one thing that had happened was I had gone to France the year before, and I had met Bigo Bernice, Be Nice, who lives in Montreal, and Laos, who also now lives in Montreal. And both of them, and Bruce Wayne from Total Feeling, a whole bunch of others, they showed me a lot of like European flow basics and they really opened my mind to leg work, flow, and infinity patterns. That was like my intro to like flow. I was severely injured at the time. I was like really into power, and I thought I was gonna be like a tricks and combos dude, and then I just got messed up in my bicep tendon. At that point, I'm like, what do I do? Like, should I just stop breaking? Things like that start to, because like I was throwing air flares, I was feeling really great. I was at that point where you could literally go vertically improve, you know, like not just gradual. It was going like this. That happened, and you think, what do I do? And then when I had that interaction in France, it really opened my eyes. Like, oh, you know what? Like, I guess it's okay to pivot while I figure out what's going on with that. And my style changed again, like, you know, drastically this time. Like, it really affected my mindset forever. So coming into Japan by that point, I learned a lot about how I can move a lot better. So like that whole trip was also fun. It was exploratory. I'd never been in Japan before. I was with like some of my best friends. You know, I was with Charles, with our friend Tom. You know, we were going around, you know, kicking it with our other friends who had been here, like also Utah World, like all these other people who were used to seeing in this environment, but now we're in their environment. There's a lot of new energy, and also interacting with people, expressing appreciation, being like, oh, I've seen you on footage, you're amazing. And then also receiving that back, like, hey, like, we really like what you're doing, like, oh, that was so cool, like, you know, and that for the first time, it invigorates you. So going into that event, it was just Charles and I. So we didn't have any other people, and it's a crew battle, so it was just two of us, and like, we always like doing that because like we'd rather enter with like your close-knit group of people who you're always dancing with, and at that time, he lived in Toronto, so we're always together, always dancing. It only makes sense. We don't need a random other person. I'd rather lose in prelims than I would make it through with just a group of people that I don't really have a connection to.
Yes.
Yeah. So like, we just did the prelims and we were just having fun. It was great. Charles was doing things I'd never seen him do, and then somehow we made it into top 16 in the crew battle, and we're like, oh, okay, cool. And then we passed top 16 into top 8. Valid Body Carnival. And the thing that I found really interesting about that battle was like, it's the same thing like you talked about, they're just people, like you always idolize them and put them on the pedestal, like, oh wow, it's Body Carnival, oh my gosh, like, we're gonna get smoked. But then when you're in the battle, after a while it starts to click, like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, we'll be fine. Because like you underestimate yourself, and like when you allow yourself to be, sometimes you really pull through in these clutch moments, to the point where like, at the end of this battle, what happened was Charles just falls down. He's like, oh, finally it's over, because he was like going hard, and like I'm still standing, and I look at the judge, and the judge is like, and I'm like, whoa, he's really thinking about who to pick. Like, we could actually win right now, like, you know. And I think that the margin of error is moderate but not big, and that's gonna make me realize like anybody can win. That's
anybody's
awesome.
game.
It's anyone's game. Like, there is no dismantle this hierarchy, like, thinking, you know, about how we think about breaking, like, oh, this person is this good, so they're always going to win. Never. Like, if you suck that day, you suck that day. That's it. Like, if you try to throw an airflow 0.5 and you land on your shoulder and you hurt yourself and everybody can see it, and a person came in with a 6-step to a clean baby freeze and a Zulu spin, I'm sorry. Like, you know what's gonna, like, that's how it goes. And that's the fun thing. It's like the journey to be your best self every day, as much as possible.
Absolutely. Great lesson for us to take away. Jumping 1 year in time, he came back to Michigan for Flint.
Much better. Every year, progress, like leaps, you know, leaps. Yeah. That year, I think compared to the previous battle, coming off of Japan, very inspired. I also seen a lot, like, from that trip, and it kind of helped me to like understand that there's some things like I didn't know, that I didn't get. And I had to really reflect on it that whole year. I was like, I saw this stuff here, I saw this stuff here. Like, you know, I had the European legwork, understanding, and that was building the flow. And then when I went to Japan, I saw people who were really intensely amazing at footwork, but like, I couldn't pick up what they were doing, and that's what bothered me. I was like, you're moving, and I know you're doing high level, high quality things, but it's like I don't have the tools to deconstruct it. Like visually, I would not be able to replicate. If we were playing a game of horse, like I wouldn't be able to keep up. And I just kept that in my mind. I was like, how are they moving like that? Like, how are they doing that? And thinking about footwork on that way. And then like a lot of studying, going back to basics, a lot of conversations, seeking out people, information, training with people. A lot of people came from Japan too, back to Toronto, training with them. Like one person, Solani, and he like really like positively impacted my dancing. He traded a lot of stuff, and he showed me a lot of like Nagoya style, like of breaking, which is like a lot of really interesting like alternate footwork methods, I'll call it. And then a lot of them, like some of my friends there, you know, learn off of one person in Nagoya called Uno One Checkmate. Amazing Nagoya b-boy, amazing Japanese breaker, like one of the illest. And then Uno One Checkmate is also a student of or has learned from Bounce, right? So like that lineage too, when I figured out like, oh, and ultimately Bounce is Canadian, right? So I was like, all roads lead back to where you live anyway, you know? Like, so I found that interesting. So I did a lot of study, and then that changed my style, you know? So I had the legwork basics, then I was learning how to translate legwork into steps. Like literally sometimes I would take the legwork and be like, okay, now how do I step this? So when I went to this battle, I was experimenting with the system of like, okay, I'm gonna take what's smooth and then make it choppy. I'll take what's choppy and make it smooth. Sometimes I'd be doing the same movement, but no one would realize it was just the same thing. And playing with that, playing with awareness, like, you know, and it was a good tester for me, mixing things, playing around.
Once you get that experience of going abroad, you're saying that that's only part of the way, because once you have this awareness, that's when you have to put in the work, right? That's when you have to come back and actually study, like you're saying, start breaking things down.
I've gone to a battle in Japan called Panjia in Nara region, and like very high level, very, very high level, tight sliders. It was the first time I saw Just Rock. And like, I was like, whoa, you know, like, but you weren't lacking in the level. And that was the interesting thing to me that really helped me to realize like anything can happen as well. That Japan trip really flipped my perspective. But the level of quality on the form, the structure, like the footwork details, like hand placements, musical timing, like in these cipher formats, in these battles, like the intensity of it, I was like, okay, like I know where I need to go, you know, and then thinking about that over the next year leading to this point of like, okay, you practice, but you got to test it out somewhere. And then for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Michigan now. That's what I got to do.
Rock Harder, 2019, jumping a few years in time now. We're going to watch the tie break.
So even before this, before we got into the battle, I was really sick that day. I wasn't feeling well. And I told Charles, hey, I'm not feeling very well, so can you take the 2 rounds and I'll do the 1, like in the prelims, and then this is top 16. And then he said to me before this battle, he said, look, I'll do it for sure, but if it goes to tiebreaker, you're doing the tiebreaker. And then so it went to tiebreaker, and that's why he looked at me and he was like, and I was like, oh man, you know, like.
What do you think?
Much better than previous years, like stacking.
You let loose in this one too.
Yeah, like, but it's also cultural context. This has been happening more so lately, as I kind of like think more, and I think I'm diving way deeper into my own cultural identity over the last 4 years, more than I did in the last 10. And so that song, Disco Africa by the Ominata Show Band, they're from Ghana. So that is a Ghanaian song. And I know that song very well. I also know it's from my culture. So there's a feeling I associate to it. You know what I mean? So I think that the cultural context plays a factor in someone's ability to do that. It's like if we went over to a country where they weren't speaking English, but they're only playing English music, and we're breaking on it, like we know all the words. They don't. That's why we have that edge. And I think culturally the same thing can happen. It's like, yo, this is from my culture. Like, you're definitely not gonna be able to appreciate it in the same way. And especially if someone's coming into it from like, oh, I gotta do this perspective, versus you're like, this is what it means and this is the essence of it, which I embody on my day-to-day. Like, I eat the food, you know, we're speaking different languages at home, like it's in the way I speak English, like literally the culture is in me. So it's a different experience when you're moving on your own culture's background in this new school tradition of storytelling, which is what breaking is. It's a new school tradition of storytelling. If you want to get better at breaking holistically, but also to have that edge, like people are always searching for this thing in breaking them. How can I get that one up on people, or how can I feel unique? Not even be unique, but feel unique, because you have to just feel it first and then you will eventually embody it. And it's because if you know yourself and you know where you come from, you know your habits associated, like the food, the things, then it's gonna leak into everything you do. Like it's gonna ooze into everything you touch. It's gonna just like non-stop. And so as you start to move, people are gonna be like, you have this texture on your movement, you have this quality, and you're gonna try to explain, you're not gonna get it, because it's related to your own relationship to you, like your experience in identity and how you continuously express that. So the more you know yourself on mental, physical levels, culturally, like where do you come from, what tribe are you, what language do you speak, like what is the language structure, like what is the meaning of the language, what is the ideology of that culture, you're gonna definitely be looking really different compared to somebody who's just like, oh, I'm just Canadian, like that's what they say, or I'm just American. You're not just that, you are so much more. And we have to dig deep to find that, because there's a lot of cultural movements associated to knowing certain things. Once you find those cultural movements and you see what already has showed up inside of you that you didn't realize, and you find all the new things that you need to supplement it with, boom, that's your edge.
It's a very good general life lesson too, because oftentimes we feel like, yeah, we're talking about traveling internationally for breaking and stuff, but sometimes we feel like, oh, there's something out there in the world for me, but sometimes the answer is already right within yourself.
Right. Or you're going out there, but not necessarily always to the right out there. You're just going to an out there, right? And out there referring to, okay, maybe instead of like spending that plane ticket to just go to some random place where you kind of just hope it's going to be cool, why don't you like put that towards some self-development, like go back to like where your family is from, like take a look around, what's the land like, what are the people like, how do they treat you, how do you treat them, like what did you feel growing up, like what do you feel as an adult, like that all plays a role into the movement.
Present day, this is earlier this summer. That
BC1 experience was interesting as a whole, I think that weekend I was really focused on like, okay, like while I had the opportunity to, let me tell some stories and like kind of have some conversations and meet me. I'd also entered the footworkers battle and like I didn't feel great about it. Like just the quality of it. No offense to footworkers, it was more just like, oh, like it just didn't feel right to me. I had gotten the pin too and I just gave it back. I was like, somebody else will appreciate it. And then in the actual stage of like the BC1 Canada, it felt like, okay, cool. In that round, interesting back and forth with like Anthony, and like, you know, we keep battling each other like throughout the years. And when I battle somebody that I know, I'm like, I'm gonna give you the work because like we have a relationship. Like, you know, like I want to go back and forth. Like it's supposed to be interesting. So the storytelling in that one, like, as I was moving through it, it's like, I'm like, let me show you something that's old, let me show you something that's new. At the end of it all, I'm gonna make you tap out, right? Like that's kind of like the feeling or the thinking, hence like even the movement, things like that. Just like a lot of play, like I can look at them and like, yo, you paying attention? Like, you know, it's just supposed to be fun, you know? And like, I'm not satisfied with the quality of my movement at all from that event. Just, I don't know, it's just sometimes you're just not on, you know? Sure. However, still appreciative of the opportunity, still appreciative of the moment. It was a good learning, and it was like, okay, cool. Like I got to represent Ghana, I got to represent Canada, I got to represent my friends. And, you know, I definitely though think. And my biggest learning from that weekend, or the thoughts that came out of it, were sometimes I've come to realize that people are so accustomed to some people winning that they don't realize the bias that they have of wanting to see somebody lose. And so it's like, let's say, I'm going to use Anthony as an example. Like in that battle, like he was doing really well, he was killing it, right? And sometimes I feel like people see him winning and they're envious and they're not putting in the same amount of work as him, you know what I mean, to get to that stage, but they feel that like, oh, why is he winning everything all the time? Because he practices really hard, like there's nothing wrong with that. And so sometimes when somebody is supporting a person and you're having this battle with this really big name, with this intense person, you would think, oh, you're standing behind me and you're supporting me, right? But it's not necessarily the case. Sometimes they're not supporting you. They're just supporting the downfall of the other person, if that makes any sense, right?
Yes,
and there's a big difference in rooting for your friend's success versus rooting for somebody to lose. And that's what I figured out that weekend, where I was like, hey, like, I noticed that behavior and I can put into words. There was a feeling before, but now it became a tangible understanding of thought that I could be like, oh, okay. So in future conversations that I ever wanted to have, if I ever see that, I can call it for what it is. You're like, oh, you're not actually being supportive of whoever you're standing behind. You're actually just hoping for this person to lose. That has nothing to do with support. It's not going to be healthy and it's not going to be sustainable if you keep acting like that. Because then you're not really being a friend. You're not really being a crewmate. You're not being, you know, the person that you need to be in order for us to all elevate. Because we're all a community at the end of the day. So that's what I learned from that movie.
One question I wanted to ask you about this Red Bull experience. A lot of younger folks, a BC1 Cypher is the goal, right? Winning a BC1 Cypher in your region or your area. For someone that I understand, as someone who sees the bigger picture, you know, takes their time with just trying to figure out themselves and figure out the art form and what you're trying to say about the art form, what kind of advice can you give to those kids that are just eager to make that next achievement?
It's anyone's game. Even if you're breaking for 3 years, you can do it. You can achieve it. You know, it's very doable. I think it's a mental game. It's not about rehearsals of just sets, things like that. It's about quality of movement. It's about structure of rounds. I'm not talking about set structures. I'm talking about systems, like fluid ways of moving that are intuitive, that you've developed over time, where the connections between certain sequences, movements, understandings are coming naturally. Like rehearsal will not help you in that environment, because after a certain point, you're not emitting that energy which is necessary for people to engage with you. Because whether we like it or not, we're feeding into the environment is feeding into us. And if we're not providing a moment for people to be like, whoa, like, I didn't know I could feel that. I didn't know anybody could do that on that beat. I didn't know you could move like that. Something like that. Everyone needs an edge in a round. I think every round needs to have some kind of an edge.
Yeah.
If you're not providing an edge in every round you do, it doesn't matter how far you make it. You could win the whole thing, but people might look at the footage and be like, meh.
Yeah.
But they could like the person who lost in the prelims and be like, that person is crazy. And like, that's who you want to be. You want to be the person who had an edge every single time they threw down. Not just the person maybe who won, but like people were like, yeah, like he won. But did you watch the top 4 battle? Like, you know, like that's the quality we're searching for. You want that quality and to be that person who can make it all the way to the finals, maybe win it. You know, that's going to provide more value to your community as well. You're being an inspiration, and you're also being an artist about it. You know.
Can we talk a little bit about an example offhand of a system of moving? So you were just mentioning just now, figuring out a way that you're moving naturally. Is that the system, or is there like an example that you can give with that? Just to better illustrate the concept.
Like, let's say tangible. I think in systems, just because that's what makes sense to me, and I think it's better than building sets. Sets, we get caught in, I have to do X, then Y, and then Z. Oftentimes, when people become very rigid about it. Versus a system might take the set and say, once I've mastered this material, it becomes like my foundation. And just like foundation, we can rearrange it any way. We can take our time between it. Maybe even that set just becomes now a concept. Like a CC no longer in that round is no longer just a move, but the CC is a concept, and we can do it on our back, so we can do it standing up. So if the round is 6-step CC baby freeze, then okay, like, is it a 6-step on the floor, or is it a 6-step standing up? Is it a 6-step on my back? Then the CC, is the CC standing up, or is the CC on my head? Or is the CC coming out of an airflow, right? And then the baby freeze. Is it a full baby freeze, or is it a broken apart baby freeze where each part is shown individually and then it's constructed for the viewer, right? So that would be a system, right? It's taking these movements and upgrading them into something that is more loose. Like, you know when a system is good when it offers the user forgiveness. So if you mess up a round and everyone knows and it's game over and you feel like, oh, I didn't hit that thing, and everyone's like, oh, you don't have a good way of moving with yourself. You have a way, it might be effective sometimes, but it's not effective, it's not been working for you. Versus if you have a good system of moving, it doesn't matter whether you hit that moment or not, because it just leads into something else which could be even better. Like we talked about before, like being natural and intention, right? You build the system out of intention so that you can be natural.
Yeah.
And feel that you're supported in just being yourself. That's why a person might build a system, right? Versus building a set might come from a form of undiagnosed performance anxiety, right? In order to achieve success, I need to structure the round like this, and it has to be like this. I put a lot of effort into it. It looks great. I have this, and it's good quality. It's solid. People like it. It's reliable, you know. But it doesn't.
And I have to hit it.
And I have to hit it if I want that feeling.
Yeah.
You know. But it's just a lesson. Like, you're really, what you're doing is you're putting a drill for yourself. Like that's what a set is. It's a drill. It's a training drill. But you're just leaving it as a drill when you put it into the public audience? No, like, we have to keep leveling ourselves up, right? So if you're a beginner, and let's say you've been dancing for 1 to 3, 4 years, you want to make your rounds and construct material, because you're gathering information, you're gathering intel. How can I use this? How can I use that? You're putting it together. Great, awesome, amazing. Now, okay, hit year 5. Okay, now we're starting to think about, what is originality? Who am I? Like, how come my form doesn't look the same as this other person? Oh, how do I build these combos? You know? Now it's like, okay, well, now you start dealing with variations. You know, there's like, people start getting into text. They call them text, right? Like, start making a lot of text off chords. That's typically year 5 and onwards. Sometimes people hit it year 4, year 3, whatever. And then, you notice after year 10, that's when people really like start to figure themselves out. And then no matter how they touch the floor, you're like, oh man, that person knows what they're doing. Like, you know, like, oh, like they're so great at this. Like they're so in it. Like they're in the movement. But that comes from the self-understanding, right? And it doesn't matter whether they're freestyling or doing content that they've pre-rehearsed. And then now we have to go higher than that, which is holistically, I have my fundamentals, I know myself as a person, and I have my own unique developed fundamentals, and it all works seamlessly together because I accept my form, my movement, I've done the work to put all of this together, and I can't mess up because anything that I fall into, I'm meant to go into because I practice. I'm a master at being me. Right? And if you fall, you fall, and like you don't have an off day, and that's okay. Like it's just breaking. And give yourself an opportunity where you can release some of the anxiety and the pressure of not being perfect. If the set requires you to be perfect, it's not letting you be your best self. Hitting it perfectly does not mean you are perfect or great. Hitting it perfectly just means that you were very anxious and you trained so hard that it was perfect.
In that moment.
In that moment.
We're going to wrap up this discussion here, Tafiya. The last thing I wanted to ask, it actually takes us back to the regional styles question a little bit. Information is so globalized today, and people inevitably were sharing news, inevitably. But I think what's less known is the information about where the history of the movements is. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to do these interviews with some of the most amazing talent really in the world. And I, of course, always ask about inspiration. So for example, Zoot is one of my inspirations. I've had the opportunity to meet him this year. I met him in Korea just this last month. And when he started, one of his inspirations was abstract skill methods. So he talked about how he would study his flow and such, and you're just like, that makes sense. Does this idea of studying lineage resonate with you? Like, do you take that on personally? And what can we use that information of history of movement? Studying one crew that inspired a generation, what was that crew like? You know, how did they dance, or like how did they develop their approach? How does having that information, how is it helpful for art?
It's important because when we know context, context is king. So if all the styles that we love or we admire, we've put on the pedestal, we've stolen from, we've had all our fun with, are coming from these people who have lived these specific, very specific sometimes experiences and very specific time periods. And we live in a completely different time period. But when we talk to them and we ask, what was it like back then and what were you thinking? And then if they tell you like, oh, it was hard, like when you went to the jam, like you didn't know you were gonna get beat up, this and that, or like you could get punched in the face for being a biter, so like we didn't go to a jam for a year, we only go to X, Y. When they tell you these kind of stories, it lets you know the amount of pressure maybe that they were under, some of the things they were having to face in their creative process as they went through and went to these things, and it lets you know like, whoa, okay, like it's no different than like you were literally put in a position where it was like do or die, like you were backed against the corner sometimes, or it was like, whoa, that's a high stakes, high pressure, like anxiety moment, that's why you move like that. That's why the movement might be so fast and erratic in certain periods. Or what was the music at the time? Like when we have those discussions about history, what does the movement mean? What if it has a meaning to that person? And that's why it's executed a certain way. And then you ask them about it, and then you're like, whoa, that's what it means? A good example of it is like, hearing about, sometimes you talk to people about the b-boy stance, right? Traditional breaker stance. And like, one of the things I've heard, which I found super interesting, is like, back then, right, in like, the 70s, like, they're looking up to and reading a lot of comic books, right? I mean, you think about like a lot of emergence of popular comics, Stan Lee, all that. You think about the 70s comics like that are being rolled out. You think about like, okay, Superman, Batman, all of them. Batman has a cape which is burn proof, right? In Breakin, we're trying to burn each other. So like, of course, when Batman goes and puts his cape over, drapes it over himself, he's impervious to fire. He's burn proof. You can't burn him. So like, of course, he's gonna hit the stance, right? Like it's a superhero pose, you know. And then thinking about that, I was like, that's what that shit means. Like, that's why you just post it. You know what I mean? So finding that, I was like, what? Like, you learn so much about the context of what we're doing, and when you go for so long in this culture without knowing what you're doing, you realize like that's why I didn't emit any feeling. That's why my movement was just bullshit. Because like I didn't know what was being passed down. Maybe you didn't ask, maybe you were never told. I think it's a bit of both. Like, there has to be that desire to know, does this mean something? And there has to be that ability to share, hey, you know, that means something to me if I pass it down, and that means something to this person. And that honors it, lets people know like where it's coming from and the conditions. It also allows them to say, this is how they made it, so when you make something in the future, think about that too, and what will you make before you pass it on? And that's really important for future.
The reason that they stand out to you so much is because of that. It's because they're drawing from their own unique experience. And practically, too, if you don't have that context, you're not going to be able to hit the move as hard, even if you tried, even if you were one of the best copycats in the world, right? It's not going to hit as hard the same way as the person that the movement means something to them. It means something to their own experience, right? Tafiya, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's cool.
We got a long day ahead of us for the jam and such, so for you to take some time to make the trip and for us to be able to do this, I really appreciate it. Did you have any other last thoughts before we adjourn here?
I think, let's say by the end of your series that you're gonna accumulate over like years and years, what do you want people to feel?
One, I just wanted to meet my heroes. That was the big driver for all of this. Being able to use breaking as an avenue to figure out other life ways too. I think one of the biggest things that we have to accept as breakers is that there will be a day we can't break anymore. So what does that mean for you? If you didn't reach your goals competitively, was it all a loss? If that really was it, it could be tragic. It could be a tragic ending if that's really how you feel. And so, at the end of all this, I'm hoping we can learn something about life. I'll put it as simply as that.
That's awesome. That was beautifully, it was beautifully put together. Wow, that was awesome.
Thank you, Tafiya. Thank you for the question. Hopefully I'll get to see you soon. We're out of here. Peace.